If you are a regular listener to the Sociology Show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for The Sociology Show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to continue keep the show going and growing. Best wishes and keep enjoying the show.
Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and in each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research and their experiences. So put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2You Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit tutor2you.net/sociology, and there you can pick up revision guides, revision videos, flashcards, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so my guest for this episode is Dr. Nicola Harding from Lancaster University. Hi Nicola, thanks for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do, Nicola?
Yeah, so I am a sociologist being held hostage in a law department, masquerading as a criminologist. So I work in Lancaster Law School, where I lecture in criminology and kind of research in lots of different areas to do with criminology, sociology, kind of social justice. But my main focus has been for the last 5 years around women and community punishments. But I've also done research before in graffiti. I focus a lot on lived experience, and I've most recently just done a study about innovation and adaptation in criminal justice and security during a time of crisis, of which the crisis was COVID.
Very apt. And before we get into your own research then, what was your journey into sociology yourself, Nicola?
So I've got quite a long and somewhat interesting backstory really, but I was a mature student, so I didn't start studying until I was 28, and I went to Keele University in Staffordshire where I did criminology and sociology. But prior to that, really, as a youngster and at the time where I guess people would normally be taking sociology at GCSE or A-level, I really didn't have a clue what sociology was. I was kicked out of school when I was 16. I didn't have a particularly great school experience. And when my peers around me were kind of going to college and things like that, I went to work instead. I'm from quite a working class background. And when we were kind of talking about college courses, not even universities, I said to my friend, I remember, if there's a degree or a course in people watching, I'd take it because I find people fascinating. But until that day, I won't ever go back to studying. And I just didn't know what sociology, I didn't know sociology existed at that point. Fast forward a number of years, I got married, had children, and I actually ended up getting in trouble with the law. I got convicted of benefit fraud 12 years ago for essentially kind of the circumstances, I guess, that I was in at the time. I was in an abusive relationship and it was very kind of financially controlling. But what that meant was I had to face my life as it was and take my punishment, which was 2 years probation. I got a 9-month suspended sentence. And so therefore I had a community punishment, which is what I've gone on to study later on. And it was there that I was really reintroduced to education, probably at a time of my life where when I needed that focus. But two, I was trying to understand how I'd got where I was in life. and find my way out of it as well. So I finished my probation, and I'd done a couple of different courses, like a drugs and alcohol awareness, so that I could go on and be a drugs and alcohol worker, a few other little bits and bobs like that, but nothing serious. And I'd kind of got the education bug. So I went and did an access to higher education at St Helens College. And in that I did sociology, psychology and social policy. I hated sociology for the first couple of months because I just didn't get it. I couldn't understand how classical sociology was, how it related to my life. And I just didn't understand it. But then we started to do topics. So we did do a criminology topic. We did do around the family, all of which should have related really heavily to my life. But it was sociology of religion that really, actually, the penny suddenly dropped. And I went from not really getting sociology and feeling like it was so distant from what I understood to it was like I'd had, blinkers on and I'd suddenly had them taken off. I became a really big lover of theory. I love exploring theory and relating it to everyday life. And then I went on to study for a degree in sociology and criminology at Keele. Like I said earlier, I got first class degree, won Student of the Year for my contribution to society around me, and also my degree classification. The award that I got for that allowed me to go on and do a master's in criminology and criminal justice. And then I started a PhD in sociology in 2015, and I passed my Viva last week. So I'm a very, very new doctor. In the time that I've been doing my PhD, I started my academic career at Leeds Trinity University, where I was a criminology sociology lecturer, but also the head of sociology. And then I moved across to Lancaster 2 years ago to take up this position as a lecturer in criminology. So probably a little bit of a different entry into becoming a sociologist. But I definitely feel that I found sociology as my home because of how I was able to relate it to my lived experience. And that's what I try and continue to do.
Yeah. And firstly, congratulations on your doctor. I'm quite interested. This is something that Dr. Jenny Thatcher and Dr. Lisa Mackenzie have said. Did you ever feel somewhat out of place being in further and higher education based on your background?
Yes, completely. And, I'm a really big champion for widening participation in its various forms. I still say now that as an academic, even working within this system, that, I've always tended to hang out more with the cleaners than with the academics. Less so where I am now, but definitely in previous positions. 20 years ago, I was working as a cleaner in Liverpool University, and now I'm a lecturer at Lancaster. It's a very strange position to be in. And I guess I had not only the difference of being working class in a very privileged kind of environment, in a very privileged institution where I don't talk right, I don't kind of look right, I probably talk a bit too much, I don't know when to shut up, all these kind of characteristics that stand you out as working class. I had that, and then not only, but I also had the stigma of the criminal record and that part of my history. And when I was a student, I wasn't able to talk about it in the way that I do now. It's taken a long process of self-discovery and reflexivity throughout my research that's allowed me to be as kind of open about my past and as open about who I am as a person, as I am. I think that working class academics bring so much to the classroom, particularly when we are in more privileged institutions, because it's simply life experiences that our students haven't had, and they're valuable because we have to remember that students coming to universities will go on to be the future decision makers within society, and we need diversity in our staff, in our student body, and we need to create the conditions that make it enjoyable and give students from every walk of life the exceptional education and learning experience and social experiences that they deserve. And so to come to university, I feel like I was really lucky that I went to Keele, which is a radical university, where actually I felt, particularly with my department, my lecturers that I still look up to, still speak to now, still champion me the way that they did when I was there. It was their belief in me and my ability and their conviction that I should be there and that I absolutely should belong that actually brought me through into academia. So whilst I can definitely feel exposed as a working class academic, and I can feel exposed as not only a working class academic, but as a woman who's a single mom with 5 children, whose life is so much closer to people that I research in criminology and sociology rather than my academic colleagues who, you know, live on the same corridor as me in the law school. It's vitally important that we have this diversity here and that our voices are heard, because actually there's been a long system within academia of, you know, privileged voices talking to each other, sharing ideas and creating culture and creating rules and creating policies and shaping society in that way. And I feel like there's a big shift to have more participatory forms of knowledge production in that. And a big part of that is working class academics and ways of reshaping the system so that it is inclusive, so that it is about every person in society, not just the privileged few. And when you're doing that kind of reshaping and transformation, it is always uncomfortable. When we feel uncomfortable about something, we are learning and we are transitioning and we are growing. To stay in our safety net, to say stay comfortable, is to stagnate. So that's why I believe that it is uncomfortable potentially in a lot of academia to be a working class academic, because we are the ones that are changing things and we are changing culture, and that transformation for everyone involved involves a lot of discomfort.
Do you still, despite the fact that you've just said you've recently had doctor now at the start of your name, do you still consider yourself working class then?
Yeah, I mean, because I only passed my doctorate this time last week, so I'm still definitely not used to doctor in front. But I definitely feel the stark contrast between my actual life and my working life. In my working life and the perceptions of me, maybe that I have a comfortable middle class life with, you know, a partner at home, a mortgage. You know, I'm not like, I live a life that is dictated by austerity. I rent. I've had to move house 10 times in 10 years. To be very blunt about it, I still have help off the government in certain aspects. You know, I'm a universal credit academic. I still have to have a top up on my wages because I don't earn enough for my family circumstances. So I think that to say that getting the title doctor suddenly makes you middle class, I would really question, well, what does it mean to be middle class?
Yeah.
My roots are working class. My life and how I live it outside of my office is working class. Everything that I bring into the classroom, the knowledge, the culture, the way that I speak is working class. Does me becoming a doctor suddenly change me? Am I still the girl with the criminal record, or am I now a doctor? Or am I just a girl with the criminal record, with the shitload of kids, with the debts, with the pressures and, you know, single parenthood? Am I all those things, but I'm also a doctor? And I would say it's probably the latter.
Yeah, it comes back to sort of Bourdieu's ideas, doesn't it? That it's cultural capital, social capital, not just economic capital that kind of defines your class.
Yes, I agree.
And can I ask you, Nicola, and do feel free to not answer if you don't want to, has the criminal record held you back in any way in terms of your progression?
In some ways it has, in some ways it hasn't. So I can give specific examples of where it hasn't. But on the whole, I found that the people that I surround myself with in academia have shown me great kindness and look at where I've come from and where I am now and see that journey, I guess, as something to be celebrated as, I guess, to be held up as an example of how things should go for people, that we should have opportunities to go from having a criminal record to becoming a doctor. That shouldn't be that unusual thing. If you were academically minded enough, that should happen, I suppose, is what I'm getting at there. But in terms of my kind of more negative experiences and how that impacts on my progression, for an example is I run a module that I teach on, or I was teaching on last year, whilst a colleague was on maternity leave, that was held in a local prison called Learning Together. The first couple of times that I went in on my gate pass, I was fine. But once they had to do the vetting, there was a problem because they put me through normal vetting and they didn't put me through standard plus. What actually meant was that I got rejected from the vetting and I wasn't allowed to go in and teach because of my criminal record. And a lot of people along the way said, no, that's not policy, that's wrong, it'll all get sorted out. And actually what happened was the prejudice was that I never got put through to standard plus. I audibly heard the verbal abuse that I was being given when I rang up to sort out gate passes for the people that I had to then organise to deliver the lectures I should have been delivering to go in for me, because I wasn't allowed into the prison because of my criminal record. So things like, she then needn't think she's coming in here, who she thinks she is, that type of thing from the prison staff. And then, ultimately it stopped me from being able to fulfil my commitment to my students. I arrived at the prison with 15 students, and to be told, no, you're not coming in because of your criminal record, I then had to disclose that I had a criminal record to those 15 students and explain why, which, is on a level humiliating. As a teacher, I then turned it round to a teaching and learning experience of, well, what does that mean about a prison being called a rehabilitative prison if it doesn't believe that you can be rehabilitated 12 years after your conviction? But it definitely acted as a barrier, and I think if I'd have been in a different institution or I'd been employed only for that role, it would have jeopardised my career for those prejudices. There's been other instances of bullying across academia. I won't go into kind of where, but I think, Lisa and Jenny are friends of mine, or I'd consider them friends, and I think our experiences are really, really similar. I don't think I needed a criminal record to perhaps get that bullying. I think being a working class academic was enough. But I think that it definitely helped that bullying to become much more apparent in the fact that they've said and behaved negatively towards me in much more overt ways and in front of people that they probably wouldn't have, because they felt like they could, because they felt like I was less than them. And that, unfortunately, is just the dark side of academia, really. And you get all different, if you're going to have diversity, you've got to recognise that diversity means diversity in personalities, and not everybody's nice and not everybody is welcoming. And when you are in, a minority group, whatever group that may be, because of, for whatever reason, I think that you definitely feel that when those who are negative or decide to be negative hold a position of power above you, whether that be their academic rank as professor, or whether it be, the kind of class or other intersection that is just holds more power than you. So, yeah.
Thanks for opening up and telling us that, Nicola. That's really kind of you to go into that. Could I ask you about influences? When you said you came into sociology a little bit later. Who first kind of influenced you? Is there any particular theories or writers that really kind of piqued your interest?
It's really hard to say, because I have my sociology of kind of crime and deviance and social control. So I'm a critical scholar. I would put myself in the critical criminologist kind of category. I've got so many. I was inspired by my lecturers at Keele, and I would be here all night if I started reeling off names, really. But definitely the critical education, both in sociology and criminology, that I received at Keele really just inspired me. My lecturers were all inspiring. They really challenged everything that I thought about society and myself. But in terms of kind of theories, I do love a bit of Bourdieu. I love and I mobilise social, cultural and economic capital within my PhD. I love the notion of around like different types of space, so like liminal space and liminality and that transition. Mimesis I also use, I'm not even sure if I'm saying that word right, but within my PhD. And I really like these concepts of how power is important within society, how it influences what we do and what we can have and who we are. But I'd say I'm very lucky to work with people like Professor Bev Skeggs and Professor Imogen Tyler here at Lancaster in sociology, who do just completely inspire me with my work. Imogen's work on stigma particularly, I'm enjoying kind of going back and engaging with on a number of levels, not just academic but personal levels. I've just been really lucky to be examined by Dr. Catherine Chadwick and Professor Phil Scraton, who are critical criminologists, and they really inspire me from their kind of political, their commitment not just only to academia but societal change, and both the small and big P political way in which they've conducted their careers in an activist manner. I don't believe that sociologists are just here to document. I believe that we should be trying to change the world for the better, and so people who do that within their research and do that within their other activities. But I also am inspired completely by, Lisa's work, by Jenny's work, by my other working class academics, by other early career researchers, Dr. Una Barr, Dr. Kirsty Greenwood, Dr. Gemma Ahern, Dr. Gillian McNaull. Like, their work around women and punishment is just inspiring because of what they aim to do. Not only that they want women's voices who are seldomly heard to be heard and understood, but also to create change that will improve people's lives. And ultimately, if we're not here doing that, then what's the point? So I'm inspired by a whole range of people and different theories, really. I'm just a big geek, and I really can't get enough, to be honest.
I do think that's such an important message, isn't it? That it's not just about the theoretical, coming up with theories, but actually to try and change the world for the better. So I totally understand your wide selection of inspirations there. So, Nicola, shall we get into your own research? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've got like I've already said, I've got really varied research interests. I'll talk to you about, first and foremostly, about my PhD, which was on women's experiences of community punishment. Within that, I worked with women who were currently undergoing community punishment, or who had recently finished their community punishment and were peer mentors towards other women. And within that research, I used methods, like creative methods such as creative writing, photography. So we used photo voice and photo elicitation to do the analysis. And I did this within a feminist participatory action research framework. So criminalised women were involved in every stage of my research. What this meant is that I was able to kind of push the envelope a little bit around methods, around trying different methods out that perhaps hadn't been used before, or definitely hadn't been used in combination together and within this framework. But also the kind of close working relationship that I had with the criminalised women in my study meant that I was able to produce a theory of navigating criminalisation. So within this theory, I do mobilise Bourdieu's notions of capital, and I propose that within the penal field, so within the field of punishment, that upon criminalisation, women enter this penal field. They have a small kind of adjustment time where they are able to kind of suss out what's going on and what's expected of them within this space. But in order to navigate it safely, they need to do two things. They need to manage trauma, so not overcome their trauma, not deal with it in any meaningful way. They just need to manage it, visibly manage the trauma that they've experienced before. They've all experienced some sort of trauma, whether that be domestic abuse, histories of sexual assault. Also, the criminalisation process itself, arrest, being, in the newspapers, held up in court, and all that is traumatic in itself. So they need to manage that to look as rational as possible. But they also need to do something which is called demonstrating desistance. So they need to demonstrate that they're no longer actively committing crimes. Now, you can't really demonstrate that you're not doing something. So for women, what this means is they need to demonstrate a recommitment to gender norms. They need to show that they may be considered fallen women or mad, bad women, but what they need to show is that they are striving towards the ideal feminine goal. So that they are trying to transform themselves into good and proper reformed women. And how they do that is through motherhood, demonstrating that they have a recommitment to being a good mother. If they aren't a mother yet, that they want to be a mother. And if they have, say, for example, lost access to their children, that they will get them back one day. And if they haven't got those opportunities to demonstrate mothering, maybe they would do it through other means, such as, demonstrating what a good aunt they are, or how they participate in society as a good female role model towards other women. So that's just one of the ways in which they demonstrate desistance. Others are around kind of transformations of the self. So looking more respectable, slimming. When I went into this and tried to ask about experiences of community punishment, I didn't expect to be given photographs of Slimming World weight loss logbooks and preparing a healthy meal. I couldn't really understand what that had to do with community punishment. And really it was about internalising that surveillance, internalising the need to monitor themselves better, but also to make themselves smaller to fit this ideal of what we think women should be and what a reformed woman would look like. She would be less wild, less unruly, and neater and smaller and take up less space. The other was transformation of the home environment. And that kind of goes hand in hand with mothering, but being a good housekeeper, making sure that your environment was also well kept. And these are obviously all aspects of doing femininity, of being a woman in the way that society expects us to be a woman. But it's in this penal field, it's important because women are criminalised, and because of that we assume that they're not doing womanhood right. We assume that they are fallen women, bad women, that need to be recorrected and be rehabilitated, not to what they were before, but to what we want them to be in society. So by demonstrating desistance and by managing their trauma, if they're able to do both, then they're able to build up their capital within the penal field. And this is their kind of social capital within that field. I call this within my thesis desistance capital, but it is really just another form of social capital specific to that field itself. If they're able to manage their trauma, but they're unable to demonstrate desistance, or they don't want to, then they may become institutionally warehoused, or if they really don't demonstrate desistance, they may be recriminalised. And recriminalised doesn't necessarily mean that they've committed another crime. It could be recalled back to prison because they're not complying with their order. Or it could be that they're just perceived as not complying, although they are, and they become labelled. So one of the women in my study, she was introduced to me as a persistent prolific offender, which means she must have many, many offences in repetition. But actually she was there for her first offence. It was her behaviour within the penal field that made them label her a persistent prolific offender, because they felt like she acted like one. So they labelled her as such, even though that was not the case. So she'd become recriminalised for not demonstrating desistance. If you are able to manage trauma and demonstrate desistance, you can go on to become a success story. And I had to do a lot of kind of critical reflexivity there about my own position and my own kind of success story narrative, I think. to really think, well, what does success mean? And within the grounds of my study, success means exiting the penal field. It doesn't mean no longer being an offender. It doesn't mean kind of going off and getting a great job or getting a PhD. It means being able to exist outside the power of the criminal justice system. So for me, the transition in my own life was from the penal field to the field of education. So I went almost directly from punishment. About a week later, I started in a higher education course. And it was through that the further education course and then higher education course that I was able to build my own levels of social, cultural and economic capital and transition away from the criminal justice system. I use the concept of mimesis to understand what the motivations are to demonstrate persistence. So mimesis is this idea that there is an overall femininity that all women aspire to. This overall femininity it's culturally bound. So generally, if we to think about it in kind of UK, kind of England and Wales culture, generally it's about what kind of woman would hold the most power. So we're thinking, I guess, of a beautiful woman who's slim, white, maybe long blonde hair or something like that, who's educated, affluent, is a good mother, and has life together. She doesn't exist. She is just how we imagine femininity done correctly. And it's what we all aspire to as women. As we're aspiring and working towards that, which is why we wear certain fashions, certain trends, it's why we behave in certain ways, because we're all doing the work of trying to become that woman, but she doesn't exist. So therefore, she is the original, doesn't exist, and the rest of us are copies. Within the penal field, the women who become criminalised are looking to the female practitioner or to the peer mentor. What they're doing is looking to those women and learning from them, and they are copying those women. So they're not even copying this ideal, they're copying and kind of mimicking the women who have the power within that field. So they become a copy of a copy. And that can help them or at least motivate them to fulfill this idea of what a reformed woman should look like, and it will help build their power within that field. So the mimesis says that through this mimetic exchange, power is transferred from the original to the copy. So that's kind of the theoretical perspective within how I use that theory within my own theoretical model. Beyond that, how I now use this, because I've already started to kind of develop this beyond my thesis, is I look at the role of lived experience. So people like me who've got experience of the criminal justice system, deviance, criminality, I look at how they are using the skills that they have learned within that kind of deviant like lifestyle. Some of them are career criminals, some less so, some, one-off events. But I look at how what they've learned during, crime, deviance and punishment, and the experiences that they've had, and how they're then mobilising them either within the criminal justice system or security sectors. So some of the people that I work with there's a kind of group of us. One was considered Britain's greatest fraud, so his name is Tony Sales, who I work with. But he now mobilises his lived experience and the skills that he developed as a fraudster to try and prevent financial fraud and financial crime. So he does things like penetration testing of banks to see can they break into them, can they commit fraud within them, and then they'll show banks how they did it in order so that they can prevent actual criminals from doing that. And so he mobilises his lived experience and the skills and expertise that he grew during that time, just in ways that now prevent crime and reduce social change. I also work with people who have less obvious lived experience, such as child of prisoners or partners of prisoners, and how they are going on to campaign for change within the criminal justice system. So I work quite closely with an activist campaigner called Jodie Beck, who runs an organisation, an activist organisation called Our Empty Chair on Twitter, which was in response to the lockdown of prisoners during COVID, and to basically demonstrate that there is an empty chair of safety for them at home, and the impact that it has upon the family and the friends of prisoners, and that prison sentences don't just affect the prisoner, but they affect, their immediate kind of family, relatives, friends, and wider society as well. Yeah. And that whilst they're at risk during these kind of turbulent times with COVID, that actually we need to rethink, why we lock people up, who's at risk, and what risk we are putting them in whilst they're in prison. So really that's kind of my most recent research, and how I'm now mobilising that with others who've got lived experience.
That's really fascinating to work with people who've actually experienced it. Like I said, going beyond the theoretical and actually seeing it in practice. One of the things I was interested in as you were talking about your study on women in punishment, it kind of reminded me of, Hardington's research on double deviance, that the women kind of get punished for deviating away from social norms, but also their gender norms as well. Do you think that's still the case, that actually women are punished more if they're not feminine, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I do. I think obviously my work is building upon those kind of feminist criminologists that have come before us. And I think that perhaps what I'm adding to the field is, yes, double deviance does happen, but perhaps not in such an obvious and overt way. It's not simply, does she look pretty, or we'll let her get off, and, thinking about like the chivalry thesis and things like that. It's not as simple as that. That if we think about the interplay of kind of beauty, femininity, but also power and privilege and intersectionality, it is that women who hold the least power within society are at intersections where they're feeling the most oppression. So, for example, within my study, mine was based predominantly in a women's centre, but all my participants were white. That shouldn't really have been. If we look at the general population and we look at statistics of, the racial statistics of women who go through punishment, is that there should have been some black minority ethnic women within the women's centre, and there just wasn't. And I can't really say why that was, other than I do speculate that I feel that even a community punishment, whilst it's still a punishment, is seen as a privilege of not going to prison. And perhaps the reason why in this geographical area there are no black minority ethnic women in the women's centre is because they probably got a prison sentence instead. Yeah. And so we know statistically that you're more likely to go to prison as a black woman for the same offence as a black man, and indeed you're more likely to go, you're most likely to be sent to prison if you're a black woman for any offence above a white male, white woman, and even a black man. They feel within sentencing they kind of get all the intersections of oppression are placed upon women, and that's why, yes, definitely there's the double deviance aspect, but I think it needs to be a little bit more nuanced to understand how deeply the culture of what we expect from women and what we hold them accountable for is ingrained within us, within society. When we say it as double deviance, we think it's very cut and dried, an answer. Of course, she was punished twice for being a woman, but that punished twice for being a woman often comes far after. It comes within your life chances of having a criminal record, but also how that intersects with your economic positioning and the social groups that you kind of belong to. So yeah, I think that it's definitely there. I think that, or I'd like to hope that my theory builds upon that notion, because even if we're not punishing women twice in a double deviant way because they are women and because they transgressed the norms of what we deem natural for women, as well as breaking the law, even if that's not the case anymore for sentencing or for our attitudes towards women offenders, which I would say it is, the way in which we try and reform them reflects the notion that reflects double deviance as being the position that they come into the criminal justice system with. So even if we don't buy that anymore in sentencing, when we try and reform them, we try and reform them through feminising activities that reinforce what it is to be a good woman. Within women's centres, a lot of them do some really, really good work with women. They're essential services for social justice. And then there are other women's centres that house punishment within them that have seemed to have forgotten what they should be doing in terms of social justice and are instead acting as almost factories for the reformation of women within this feminine ideal. So they do things like, flower arranging, makeup and hair, arts and crafts activities, cooking, cleaning, stuff that is very reminiscent of Alana Barton's work around semi-penal institutions, where we used to criminalise women for drunkenness, lewd behaviour, and we would put them even without trial often, we would put them within a semi-penal institution such as the female penitentiary for 2 years until they were either ready for service in a affluent person's home as a maid or similar, or until they were married. So we would use the social controls of being employed within a family, within an affluent family to keep them out of trouble, or we would use the social control of the husband within a marriage to keep them out of trouble. And that's what the female penitentiary really was there for, was to reform women back to productive members of society, either in service to an affluent household or in service to their husband. And I think that whilst we think that we've really reformed and moved on from that, actually what we tend to do within some gendered services is still try and reform women into an ideal of what we think is acceptable. So maybe they don't need to go and get married now and have that social control, and they don't need to go and work in service, but they definitely need to behave in ways that we would expect of women, and not go and get drunk and not get into fights and, not have multiple sexual partners, things like that. That's the type of ways in which we reform women now, but it's very much reminiscent of when we used to put women in the female penitentiary.
Thank you, Nicola. And so the last question I've got to ask, if people want to read more about your work, where can they find it, or where can they get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on Twitter, so my Twitter handle is @NicolaA.Harding, and I'm always really glad to have kind of interesting exchanges there. I've got a paper about my PhD is in methodological innovations. If you just put my name in and have a look, and that's about co-constructing feminist research. And I'm at Lancaster University, so I have a research page on their website where you can see my latest publications. So there's quite a number of ways. Always happy to answer an email, a Twitter request, or just have a chat. So I could definitely get in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Nicola. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
If you are a regular listener to the Sociology Show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for The Sociology Show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to continue keep the show going and growing. Best wishes, and keep enjoying the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.